Welcome, everyone. This is the Comics in Motion podcast. I am one of your hosts, Chris Phelps, and my co-host and very good friend is Mr. Dave Horrocks.
Hi, Chris, and hello to our listeners out there. Welcome to our bonus episode. And what we are going to do, we're going to go through an interview. I had a chance, Chris, to catch up with a certain Ashley Victoria Robinson, she's a comic book creator. She's got a Kickstarter out at the minute, and she's also one of the hosts for the fantastically informative Geek History Lesson podcast. Now, this is a bit of a surprise for you, I guess, Chris, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, I did think it was obviously best, normally when we do interviews, it's the two of us, isn't there?
Yeah.
But I did think to myself, well, we've got someone here who's younger, smarter, funnier, knows a lot more about comic books than me. And I did think my role on the podcast would be a little bit at threat. So I thought, well, I'll just speak to her and not do myself out of a job here. So no. So seriously, though, obviously a little bit of scheduling conflict here. So what I did was I just had a chat with Ashley. It was a really great interview. It's really great to catch up with her. I think, we're going to go ahead and back this Kickstarter. You've only got a few days left to back it, and again, there's different levels right down from $1. You can go up to $5,000 if you want. Again, it's been very candid and transparent about what are reasons for generating this Kickstarter. So Ashley's a Canadian national, but she's been living in the US for a number of years, and so is looking to pay some of the bills off as part of going through that application process to become a US citizen. But again, really, really talented person. So it was a really great interview.
No, good stuff there. And I think as well, you have that comic background, you've got the skills, the people, that area. With me, obviously, and I'm growing, my knowledge is growing every single episode. It's really nice to listen to that. And Ashley comes across such a really, really genuine person as well, Dave. So I think it's a great episode that we've pulled out the bag there as well. And obviously, it's a bonus for all our listeners as well. And if there's anyone out there listening who wants to come on and talk to us about any of their projects within the comic world or, anything along them lines, then please get in contact with us, because we're always open for that, aren't we, Dave? We've had some fantastic guests on in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. So should we get into the interview then?
Let's go.
Today I'm delighted to say we have a very special guest on the show, Ashley Victoria Robinson. Welcome to the show, Ashley.
Hi, and thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It is fantastic. So Ashley is a comic book creator and writer, and she also hosts one of the most fantastically insightful podcasts I know of, Geek History Lesson podcast. So it is a real honor, genuinely, to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me bully my way on.
No problem at all. Now, Ashley, I do want to get talking to you about your latest Kickstarter, Aurora and the Eagle. That's easy for me to say. But first of all, I'd like to understand a little bit more about how did you first get into reading comics?
That is such an easy answer. So my family, I'm from Canada originally, so we are Commonwealth relatives here on the show today. And my mom's family is French. So growing up, we had a lot of French content in our home as much as we had English. So I had like Babar and Tintin, which is what you call it in English, which is really weird, and Asterix and Obelix. And all of those were my first comics growing up because they seemed nice and harmless. And my parents were very gracious in that they didn't mind that we were reading what we were reading as long as we were like not killing each other. I have a little brother. And so that was my first gateway. And then being from Canada, some of the content that we got at the time, it's not like this anymore. Some of the content that we got came out more slowly than it did in America or wherever else it was originally created. So we got Batman the Animated Series a few years after it originally aired. And seeing that for the first time was when I really got into superheroes. Like, I'd seen the Adam West Batman. They had reruns of that. And like, it's interesting because that's just recently come back into vogue. You know, it used to be really fun and fashionable to make fun of that. But so that was like my first encounter with real not real, with licensed superheroes in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And then Batman the Animated Series. And then I was like, do I want to be Robin or do I want to kiss Robin? Which is a pretty big question when you're about 6 years old.
I can completely empathize with that. I have the same wonder myself.
It's a big question, man. It's a big question. And my parents would take me to we didn't have a local comic book store, but they would take me to comic book stores from time to time and give me, we have $2 coins. They're called toonies. And give me a toonie and let me buy whatever I wanted out of a quarter bin. And I would truly just buy everything that had Robin on it. So like
Awesome.
my first issue was New Teen Titans 39, which is very pivotal. It's where Dick and Wally they come to the team and they're like, we're not going to be Robin and Kid Flash. Like, I guess we'll be around, but we're going to change our costumes because our upper thighs are hairy and it's too much to be wearing these little booty shorts. And that's sort of the beginning of the Judas Contract, which to this day is one of my all-time favorite DC, well, any comic storyline. But yeah, basically we had them in the home from the time I was very, very young, and my parents just wanted us reading and not smacking each other. So we were always allowed a lot of freedom with that, which is really nice.
So, do you speak a bit of French? I'm assuming if your mum's French, you do. Are you completely bilingual?
Oui, je parle français. Je pense que je suis bilingue, mais peut-être pas si vous êtes français.
Very good, very good. Now, I'm slightly embarrassed to say, I guess I'm embarrassed about two things. So, currently at the moment, I head across to Belgium quite a lot, and I do stay quite often. I'll stay in Louvain-la-Neuve, which is basically where the Tintin Museum is.
Yes.
I haven't actually made it to the museum yet. So,
oh my gosh.
It's definitely on my list to go there.
I have never been there either, but I am deeply jealous. I've only ever been to Brussels in Belgium, but it was really cool.
Yeah, so it's actually not that far. It's about probably 30, 40 minutes drive or something. I mean, you've got more of an excuse, I think. The fact that I'm staying in a hotel in the same town and I'm supposedly, a comic enthusiast. But no, honestly, I will get there at some point. But
maybe
it
this conversation will...
The other thing, obviously, I've been going across there, and it's around, in and around Brussels is a lot of French speaking, and I just cannot pick up the language at all. So they're always kind of a bit impressed if I manage to just throw out the odd word or start off a conversation with ça va. And what confused? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, ça va, ça va, ça va is like a decently good conversation that you can have in French. So that's not a bad way to start. They're probably a little kinder there when you go to France. It's great for me because I can speak to them and they're very friendly. But I like to watch the French be mean to non-francophone. It's like a delight that I take in this world.
Yeah, I like I say, I try, and that confused me because, so when you go to school and you learn, a little bit of French, ça va is the question. Mm-hmm. And you reply with bien or très bien or something like that. And when I went across there, they were saying ça va to each other. So it'd be like, ça va? Ça va? Like, no, that's the question. No, that's the response as well. It's like, my brain can't take it.
It makes you appreciate how simple English is.
It does. And the few times that I can try, if I'm trying to order a beer, I'll say, un Stella à toi, s'il vous plaît, and they'll respond to me in English.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the other fun thing, particularly about Europe, is everyone speaks English. So if you have no bearing as to what is happening, you can get by really easily. Except we went to the last time I was in Slovenia. I don't think anyone there spoke English, which is also wild because I'm a white person with dark features of brown hair, brown eyebrows. And it's wild to look at someone who looks very much like you and you have nothing. You cannot manage in the slightest.
Yeah, I think in the wealthier countries, in the major cities, they're used to speaking English. But yeah, if you get into Slovenia, especially even if you go to Spain, you get outside of Barcelona, Madrid, and what have you, outside of the tourist destinations, you Google Translate is a godsend, quite honestly.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I also have to say, your history is probably not that different to mine because, I mean, although I remember growing up more so on the Marvel stuff, quite honestly, but going a little bit further back than that, I can remember reading quite a lot of Asterix.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember being at school, and one day a week, they'd take you all to the library and you could pick up a book. And I picked up this Asterix book. And I remember the teacher saying, "Really? You're going to pick that up? You shouldn't be reading that."
Asterix is really good.
Yeah, I know, and I think it was funny. Just when you're saying about Tintin, it just sparked off this memory, and I thought, wow, how times have changed. Where back then it really was frowned upon. Comics are for young kids, but you grow out of that. So I'm glad it's not like that anymore. And it didn't put me off, obviously.
Yeah, good.
So it seems, in terms of the mainstream and the licensed properties, it seems from what I can tell that you lean a little bit more to the DC side. Would that be fair?
I would say so. That's definitely speaking in broad strokes, of course, but I love a hero's journey and I love classic big archetypes. And DC is DC is a pantheon of gods. And it's very, very inspired by Greek mythology. It's a lot of big ideas. And you can say that all the characters, or this character or that, is as ground level as you want. You can say that that's cute. It's not true. Batman has no business being in the Justice League. But it's just more to my taste. That's all. And I never got over being in love with Robin. He's still my all-time favorite character. But I read a ton of Marvel. I love Marvel. X-Men was a huge entry point for me reading regularly and picking up a series. But yes, my heart will always belong to DC.
Awesome. And I should say as well, part of the original idea that when we came up with this podcast, so myself, I've read comics for a long time, since the early 80s. Chris, who's my co-host, he hasn't ever read the kind of mainstream comics. There's some of the older British comics like the Beano and the Dandy that I used to read. And but we loved watching all the movies and the TV shows. And we thought, you know what, if we created something where we just looked at the same thing from two completely different perspectives, mm-hmm. that might be interesting. It'd be just interesting for us, and hopefully, someone wants to listen as well. But kind of what I really wanted to do is, it's kind of similar to what you're doing at the Geek History Lesson, only you guys are going way more. You've got an encyclopedic knowledge, quite honestly, that I'll never have. But really, what I wanted to do was to just lower the bar for people, to watching these movies and TV shows, to just get a little bit more knowledge about what's going on there. Because I thought, well, if you walked into a comic shop now, I've been reading X-Men since the Claremont days. If I step away from X-Men for a little while and go back, I've got no idea what's happening. So I've got no idea how you would actually get into it right now. But one of the revelations for Chris was that there's more than one Robin, that Robin isn't actually just Dick Grayson.
There's like 7?
Yeah. So I have to ask, who's your favorite Robin if Robin is your main guy?
Tim Drake, the greatest of all Robins.
Excellent.
I started reading comics in the 90s, and he was the Robin of the time. And I think when you're a little kid, it's a lot easier to wrap your head around the concept of there are multiple legacy characters, particularly at that point. Like, it is daunting now to go into a comic book shop and be like, where do I start? But if it's a decent comic book shop with decent people, mm-hmm. then they will help you. There's great, like a Batman Hush, Batman Long Halloween, Batman Dark Victory. Those are all really great, like easy, accessible Batman stories. If all you know is that Batman is Batman, and maybe you know about Robin and Catwoman, like you don't need to know anything else to get the swath of that. But when you're younger, I think you're just more malleable. So like, it doesn't matter if you forget, if you have issue 5 and then issue 8, like you'll fill in the gaps. So I was like, cool, great. So Robin grew up and turned hot, and now we have a new young smart Robin. And one of them's dead. Okay, got it. Here we go. Yeah. So Tim Drake has always been my favorite. And I think it's because he's the most similar to Batman. Dick, I think, is the best complement to Bruce Wayne's Batman. But Tim is maybe smarter than Batman. And that's really interesting. And he operates the most like a detective. And my favorite Batman stories are the ones where he's actually being a detective.
Yeah, absolutely. So you must be excited, I would have thought then. So apparently the new movie that's being written right now, they're going to focus a bit more on the detective side because they've never really explored that in the movies. But, that is a big part of his character in the comics, isn't it?
It is. That would be my absolute favorite is if we actually got a detective story because he's called the world's greatest detective. That's a huge part of his relationship with Ra's al Ghul. And I'm just a huge Sherlock fan. So every time we can get some sort of reflective tropes in Batman, I'm very happy.
Yep, hopefully, fingers crossed. I'm pretty sure we won't get another Batman and Robin type thing with George Clooney, but I'm sure it'll be great. So I have to ask, so how did you catch your break going from comics reader, comics enthusiast to actually becoming a comic book writer?
It's not a good story. So
I'm sure it is.
It's not. So obviously we know that people write comic books. There's credits page. You know that people draw them. You know there's something called a letterer and a colorist and an inker, which you can figure it out eventually what all of those things mean. So in 2013, I was hanging out with Jason Inman, who is my co-host on the Geek History Lesson podcast.
He's a little bit more than your co-host, isn't he?
He's also my husband, yes.
By the way.
We do a bunch of he was not my husband at the time. Okay. He's my husband now. Yes, we do a bunch of projects together. We work on his YouTube channel together. We co-write Jupiter Jet, which was our first series, and Science, which we're wrapping up right now. So yes, but so Jason was going to enter the Top Cow talent hunt, and he was like, "You should do it too." And I was like, "Okay, I've never thought about writing a comic book before." So they were very generous in that they provided a number of sample scripts that you could look at, and one of them was a Tim Seeley script. And what I love Tim Seeley, and I was really enjoying Revival at the time. So I was like, great, I'm going to copy this. So my scripts are styled in Tim Seeley's style. Not that anyone's going to be looking at them enough to be able to realize, but that's just a fun Easter egg. And then I was one of the winners that year of the Top Cow Talent Hunt, which was, it's funny, the same year that Isaac Goodart, who is drawing the DC YA Catwoman graphic novel. We won the same year. And I'm still friends with a lot of people who kind of came up in that class. Teenie Howard was one of the other winners. So as a winner, I got to write a backup story in Witchblade 175, which was amazing because I read Witchblade growing up, and the main writer of that story was Ron Mars, and Ron Mars invented Kyle Rayner, my favorite Green Lantern. So that was super, super cool. And then I can't remember, maybe 6 months later, they were doing a series of one-shots about some of the other cyborgs in the universe. So Top Cow has a pretty expansive universe that includes Aphrodite 9, who is a robot in the future, and all of her siblings. So I wrote the Apollo 9 one-shot. And then all of my work after that has been pretty self-driven. I mentioned Jupiter Jet. That was not the first series we ever pitched, but that was the first series that was greenlit. We kickstarted that was published through Action Lab. If people liked that, we're going to be circling back to do volume 2 later this year. So keep your eyes out on the socials. I like to describe that as Kim Possible meets the Rocketeer. And then our second project is called Science. And it's basically, what if Harry Potter went to Star Trek school and was a nice Indian American lesbian? And
nice.
Yes, thank you. You can tell I live in LA because I have all of my elevator pitches down to Science. And we're actually writing the final pages of that. They're due by the end of the day today. And our art's in a really good place. So that should be out in June. I'm hoping we have some to bring to San Diego Comic-Con. We will see Touchwood, and that's being published with Eisner-nominated Bedside Press. They're a really, really amazing publisher that I've wanted to work with for a long time. And now, in addition to the work that we're doing together, Jason and I are working on our individual comic projects, and mine is called Aurora and the Eagle.
That is, and let's get onto that in a second. I think what I would like to know, though, so you mentioned that Jupiter Jet was your first successful pitch.
Yes.
And I imagine if you're going through that process of pitching stuff, you'll sometimes have a great idea. Actually, a top cow kind of link back. I think it was about episode 31. We spoke to David Hine, who'd done some of the Darkness.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he'd said when they went to pitch Spider-Man Noir, it was really easy. It was just the right place at the right time. We've got this idea, and they were like, yeah, we love it. I'm wondering, for some of those earlier pitches, you would refine your pitching technique, but are there some things that didn't get greenlit that maybe you think, that was a great idea, but we just didn't pitch it right?
I definitely think so. I think all of those ideas, I think they're all worthy. They definitely need reworking, and especially in terms of the pitch. I don't necessarily know if I'm great at pitching even now, but we took Alex Segura, who is, God, he's not the CEO. He's a very important person over at Archie Comics. He teaches a class on how to pitch, and we used his style and his techniques for Jupiter Jet, and then Jupiter Jet was the first thing that was greenlit. So now we base everything on that style. Mm-hmm. But I think we had to go through all of the failures up to that point in order to refine what we were doing and ultimately come up with the best idea. Your toughest time pitching is going to be, when you're no one. Now I have, 2 series under my belt. So more people are likely to at least consider reading the pitch. But the other big problem is it's hard to get anyone to look at an unsolicited pitch. So we were very fortunate to get Jupiter Jet to go at all. But there's a lot of stuff that I would revisit. I don't know when on my calendar that would happen, but yes, theoretically, yes.
Awesome. Well, we'll look out for those. It's good to have a library of ideas, and then you can always go back to them.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you, because I don't think we haven't had someone who's an editor. So you obviously spent a bit of time being the head editor at Top Cow. Mm-hmm. So can you help me and our listeners understand a little bit about what does that actually entail?
It's funny because being an editor is a really weird, ephemeral thing, and a good editor, and I obviously can't speak to whether I'm a good editor or not, is invaluable. I do still edit in a freelance capacity. I edited the first draft of Jason's prose book, which is coming out in June. And I'm working with one of the writers on Family Guy on his first comic book project as well. As an editor, your job primarily, in my experience, it might be different if you work for the big two, but all my experience is in indie comics, primarily just to make sure that the train runs on time and send people emails being like, hey, you blew your deadline. When are these pages coming in? And then it's a lot of what you would imagine editing is, if you know, what a book or a newspaper editor does. You, to some extent, can get involved with story development. Depends on how early you're brought on to a project, but it's just bringing a different pair of eyes and asking questions that maybe haven't been asked before and coming at it from a more well-rounded perspective. As a creator, it's really easy to get very excited and then lose the forest for the trees. And it doesn't mean that what you're creating isn't any good, but it is worth it to have that outside voice going, hey, she's wearing a watch here, but she was wearing a necklace in the first scene. You have to go back and change that. Or narratively, I don't know if this character would act this way. Pitch to me why. And if you can't, maybe consider going back and reworking that. Your whole job is basically to poke holes in a project so that by the time it gets to the reader, they're not able to do that. Or because nothing is perfect. That's what's beautiful about art created by humans, is we're very fallible, but you want to give people a chance to poke holes in things like bigger universe questions that maybe they want explored more and not in the finer details. And so as an editor, your job is to kind of sand the rough edges off a project and make sure the book actually happens as much as possible. If your artist is in Croatia or something and you're in the United States, for example, it can get a little tougher.
That's really interesting. I think there's very much a kind of almost like a project manager type, a coordinating part to it. But there's also the continuity, both from the art and the writing, the narrative. I can imagine there could be quite a lot of butting of heads there, couldn't there?
There can be, and it takes, you have to be tactful, of course, but you would hope that whatever creative team you're working with is respectful and sees the value in what you're doing. And I will say that a really fabulous editor can really, really open your book up in a very interesting way. We've been fortunate enough to work with Joe Illidge on a couple projects. Joe edited my all-time favorite Batman event, No Man's Land. And what he brings to the project that he collaborates on is like out of this world, invaluable. He's so smart and he sees things from such an interesting perspective. And he also is tactful enough to be like, hey, this is a great idea, but your pitch is a mess and you should fix it. Which, and again, I don't know what it's like when you're Mark Waid. Maybe no one tells you that. But for me, I would much rather hear that from someone who I know has my best interest in mind than like someone on Twitter. I would rather hear it in that caring way where I can do my best to fix it. And maybe it'll still wind up a mess, but at least I knew that going in.
Yeah. No, that's really good. It's a lot of building relationships with the creative teams there. As like I say, we haven't had an editor on before. I think, the person who comes to my mind is of course Stan Lee, obviously famous over there as an editor, but I'm not sure, if a lot of people appreciate that the editors get involved in the creative stuff as well and can influence, sometimes in quite a major way, influence a lot of those storylines.
I don't think people appreciate letterers either because the art of lettering is being subtle. Good lettering you don't notice, but bad lettering you absolutely do notice. And I think no matter what level your project is at, it is always worth hiring a professional letterer and paying them whatever they want to make a book look good.
So yeah, absolutely. And some, like you say, I don't notice it quite honestly if it's good. But sometimes, you spend a lot longer on a particular panel if the lettering's bad.
Mm-hmm. It's something that now that I'm creating comics, I'm like very aware of the lettering, whereas before I'd have been like, I don't know. It's very subtle art.
Yeah. So let's get on to Aurora and the Eagle. So at the time of recording, you've got 6 days to go. You've smashed your goal already, which is great. But can you tell us a little bit about that idea and what the story is actually about?
So this is one of those long time ideas I've been cooking on for a while, and I was never quite sure if or how I was ever going to execute, but then my circumstances sort of allowed me to open the door on it. So I think I mentioned this already. I am Canadian. I live in the United States, and that means the immigration process is full of a lot of very expensive lawyer fees, very expensive filing fees, things like that. I've literally been working on it for my entire adult life. And I am applying to be an American citizen because I live here, so I should like to vote and own property and be afforded all of the rights to things like social services that I am currently not as a landed immigrant. So that price tag was more money than I have in my bank account. And I don't have an issue with anyone who does something like a GoFundMe or just a strict fundraiser. But I wanted to come up with a more creative solution for the sort of issue that I was facing. And so I had this idea for Aurora and the Eagle, and I thought, well, I'll just make a comic book. That's a completely logical way to solve this problem. And I did. And so Aurora and the Eagle imagines a world where the Justice League operates like the United Nations. So there's a different representative, a different superhero for every country. And at the beginning of the book, the sort of inciting incident is that the Canadian representative dies. And his whole character is a joke that I think is very funny, but I don't think is funny to anybody who's not Canadian. So we'll see how that plays. So he dies. So the Unity League, which is the name of this team, sends the American vigilante, the Eagle, to Canada to recruit a new hero. And they recruit a nice, tiny, blonde, white girl with brown hair because I'm a nice, tiny, white lady with brown hair. And her name is Aurora Borealis, which tells you two things. It tells you what kind of superpowers she probably has. And then it also tells you the tone of the book. It's very golden age in that way. Every time a new hero is introduced, there's a logo that flashes in the back. They have a hero pose. It's very lighthearted in that way. And it also leans into tropes and like representational imagery from each country. So Aurora has to decide if she is going to go to the United States and begin her training to become the best superhero that she can be by becoming an immigrant. And it mirrors my journey in coming to the United States to live my American dream. So even though it's about a bunch of superheroes, and Jupiter Jet and science are much more sci-fi or space opera, they're a lot less superhero than one might think. Aurora and the Eagle is my most personal project to date, which is a completely crazy thing to say. And we did hit our stretch goal. That was our goal. We hit that in 2 days, which was awesome. Right now, we're like a little less than $2,000 away from hitting $10,000. And if we hit that by the time the campaign concludes, then I can go ahead and produce the full graphic novel, because this campaign is for the first chapter, the first 20 pages. So you basically get the first issue of Aurora and the Eagle. And I would love to be able to go into production on the full graphic novel. And then if I did that, I would basically give everyone who backed this first campaign a 40%, a pretty significant discount code to order the trade, because they believed in me and they believed in the story from the beginning. So that's what I'm working on right now. And it's been a very strange process, because it's my first big project working without Jason. So obviously he kind of acted as my editor on the first draft. So he's still kicking around. He's still helping out. But it's my first foray into handling a lot of this on my own and dealing with the audience more directly. And it's been truly amazing. And I have a completely international collaborative cast working with me on it. And one of the things I would like to do, if I get to do the graphic novel, which I will one way or another, we'll just see how long it takes, is I want to do one-shots by different international teams that represent some of the different heroes. Cavan Scott, who you may know if you like such things as Star Wars comics, asked me if he could write my English hero. So I'm like, sure, why not? I want like Nicholas Scott to draw my Australian hero. So I have big plans for the book. But right now, trying to get $10,000.
That sounds really cool. I honestly, fingers crossed, I hope you do it. It sounds like a fantastic concept, and I'm actually quite interested in seeing what this English character is going to look like, as well as part of that Unity League.
Totally. And it'll be interesting. I haven't decided yet how much freedom I'm going to give people and the creative teams in their design process, but we'll see what kind of joke Cavan goes for whenever he gets around to it.
Awesome. I mean, one way you could smash that, because I was looking through the Kickstarter, the one that jumps out to me is the Canadian Singing Telegram.
Yes.
So for a whole $5,000, you can have Ashley turn up wherever in the US or Canada, and you'll sing "Oh Canada."
I will, and I'll bring them a whole bunch of copies of Aurora and the Eagle. But I always put that on Kickstarters. No one ever goes for it, but we shall see.
Hopefully. I don't know if we've got any rich benefactors, any Bruce Wayne types out there, but you never know. You never know. So if you want Ashley to turn up, and it can be "Oh Canada" or any superhero theme, I believe. So
yes.
Get your hand in your pocket, and then Ashley can smash that goal.
I do have a lot too. I think a bunch of them are still available. I do have a lot of editor, script, and portfolio reviews, because I do want as many other people to have the opportunity to make comics, and more comics just means better comics. So we have really cool creators who are offering critiques on people's work, like Liam Sharp, who's drawing the Green Lantern and drew Wonder Woman, Stephen Byrne, who's drawing Mara and Wonder Twins right now. I have script reviews. Jason has script reviews. Heather Entos, who's a fabulous editor, who used to be at Marvel and is now at Valiant, Mags Visaggio. So hopefully people will snap those up before they go away forever.
Yeah, no, that's great. If you've got aspiring writers out there, I'm sure there's lots. There's a lot more people wanting to get into comics, isn't there, than actually spaces, than seats.
Well, that's what's cool about the sort of the Kickstarter economy is now all you need is, a good team and a good idea. And Kickstarter is very egalitarian. People will either back it or they won't. But it gives a lot of opportunity to people where there might not be in that more traditional publishing space, but I do understand that when people ask me, how do I write a comic? I'm like, well, you write a comic, which is hard advice to execute. So something like this and this level of access to professionals makes it a little easier to sort of get yourself in that headspace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to ask then, so you've hit your goal. So when are you actually going to be a US citizen then?
It's really funny. I actually filed all my paperwork last week. And then I put that on a nice fancy credit card, and I'm going to use these funds to pay off that credit card. And then, so the application process is and that's not true. The application process is lengthy due to a number of other factors. The processing time is quite lengthy. And it's been lengthened. It's taken, they tell you it takes between a year and 18 months. But under sort of the way things are right now, in the States, it's taking a lot closer to 18 months. So hopefully in 18 months, hopefully I sneak it in time for the election. That would be amazing. I really want to vote. For the reasons I want to become a dual citizen. So hopefully, if I hit you up in like 2 years, I will be a full American citizen.
Awesome. Fingers crossed. Definitely. And, I try not to get political on this podcast, but I'm pretty sure I know which way you'd vote, so hopefully you will.
Yeah, hopefully if you're into that, you will believe in me and you will want my vote.
So, keeping on the Canada theme then, so who are some of your favourite Canadian superheroes? You mentioned Robin there, but there's quite a lot of famous Canadian superheroes, isn't there?
Right. Like, it's tough not to say Wolverine, the Canadian everyone thinks is American, played by an Australian. I did love him a lot as a kid. I love a good surrogate father trope, and Wolverine is very that for the X-Men. Alpha Flight is incredible. I want to write Alpha Flight so bad. Marvel, I know you're listening. Please read my Alpha Flight pitch. It would be so good. But I also, and Aurora takes a lot of inspiration for, during both of the world wars, Canadian comics were really amazing. And particularly during World War I, because the United States was not producing comics in the way that Canada was. And we have a really great legacy of these Golden Age heroes. And one of my favorites is Nelvana of the North. And she has sort of vaguely spiritual, proprietary Native First Nations powers, but she was a huge Canadian superhero that I really, really love. They just collected her. Bedside Press, actually, who is publishing Science, collected and updated her for, not updated, but they recolored it for the modern age. And I think she's a really incredible character. And I think that there is a place for her in her legacy and larger pop culture. I would love to see her. I'd love to see her get it someday. I also really loved Jeff Lemire's Justice League United, which was basically Justice League Canada. But you can see the point in the book where he's not having fun anymore and is like, all right. And so the book kind of goes downhill from there, which is a real bummer. But like, yeah, honestly, Alpha Flight is probably my favorite of the Canadian superheroes. And
of course, we've got an Aurora in there as well. So who would be your favorite? Who would be your favorite character from Alpha Flight?
Probably, I want to say Puck just on a lark, but that's not actually true. I like Vindicator. I like a hero who wears their country's flag across their chest. What's not to like about that? And then I love a Sasquatch. I just think like the Yeti myth is so interesting.
Yeah, I think I'm probably right with you there. I mean, how can you not like Puck? And I think I've not read any, but I know there's is it Captain Canuck as well? Yes. He kind of looks a little bit like the Vindicator there. Very
much so. I've not read any Captain Canuck either, but I can't tell you the last time it was published. I think there might just be like one collection. So I am remiss, and I will have to get on reading that.
And do people really think Wolverine's American?
I think in the beginning, they did. I think now it's become enough. It's like a part of the zeitgeist now. I mean, even the terrible X-Men Origins Wolverine has that awesome moment where Stryker's like, Logan, your country needs you. And he goes, I'm Canadian. And he drives away.
Yeah.
But I feel like when it was just the X-Men cartoon, a lot of the normies who didn't read comics, just assumed that Wolverine was American.
I guess so, yeah. Actually, Alpha Flight appeared in there, didn't they? And
Yes,
they had
did.
some pretty interesting accents of every variety there. The Irish, the Canadian.
What is even Gambit's accent? It's funny. The Bob and Doug McKenzie, the accent that everyone thinks Canadians sound like, it's kind of like the Lucky Charms Irish accent, like nobody actually sounds like that. But there are huge swaths where you can definitely hear the Scottish and Irish influence and the French influence. Like that's why we have a more rounded OU, that like how like a vowel sound, which is something that I had to unlearn when I came to the States. Because let me tell you, if you ever want to be made fun of for the way you talk, move to America. They'll let you know.
I'm sure. I mean, I can't help but think of South Park, who mercilessly take fun of the accents.
Yes, definitely. But I will give South Park this. You can tell it's all with love, and that's sort of the fine line, right, about parody is, are you being too mean?
Yeah, and actually, I mean, Ryan Reynolds, obviously another proud Canadian there, but when he's Deadpool, again, another character, we don't know exactly where in Canada, but, he's Canadian as well, but he pokes a bit of fun in the movies as well, doesn't he? When he's shouting because he's stubbed his toe or something, he'll shout out, Canada.
Yeah.
But no, that's awesome. I'm going to be fairly boring. I think, from being a kid and even now, even through the terrible movies and through the overpowering Wolverine, I just have to go back to him. I've loved him, from those early days of reading him, quite honestly.
I mean, he's sort of our most powerful American created export in terms of superheroes. It's hard not to just be like, well, the Wolverine, duh. Scott Pilgrim, I guess, is another good offering.
Yeah.
Created by a nice Canadian.
I do have to say, I mean, I'm surprised we've not, of all the different characters that we've seen on the big screen and the little screen, I'm sure, surely there's got to be a time when Alpha Flight is gonna appear somewhere.
I hope so. I think Alpha Flight would be a great TV show.
Yeah, again, because
Really
it's got all the same things, the same ingredients, hasn't it? With the X-Men and more recently on the TV, you've got Doom Patrol. I know you guys were talking about that the other week.
Yeah, Doom Patrol is like shockingly good.
Yeah. I must admit, I mean, I hadn't read, well, I'm probably in the majority of the world actually, and not having read that much Doom Patrol. But yeah, the TV show that's absolutely awesome.
You only need to read the Grant Morrison stuff. You can leave the rest of it.
Yeah, and that's too wacky for me as well, to be honest. Or it's just when Grant Morrison is too wacky, it's a bit too much for me. I think that Doom Patrol run is just the right amount of wackiness I can take from Morrison stuff.
You can definitely tell what he was into reading in the 80s. I'll say that about it.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, definitely, guys, get yourself over to that Kickstarter. There's loads of different offerings. As Ashley said, you can get your, if you're an aspiring writer, you can get your work critiqued by some of the professionals in the business, Ashley herself.
That's right.
And Ashley's other half, Jason, as well. Or you can get I can't get away from the singing, the $5,000 singing Canada ogram.
Man, I would be so thrilled if someone bought it, truly.
Now, I have to ask you, so Geek History Lesson, I must confess, I stumbled across this about 3 months ago.
You have a lot of catching up to do, my friend.
I do. I mean, it's been going for a long time, hasn't it? I mean, I kind of wish when we started up this podcast I knew about it, because it'd make my research a lot easier. But how did you guys come up with the idea for that podcast?
That was Jason and I wanted to do a podcast for quite some time. We were actually going to call it The Weekly Planet, but there was another podcast that owned that domain name and wasn't making content regularly. So we couldn't call it that. And we knew we wanted it to be educational. We wanted there to be like that type of value in it, because we could not commit just with our schedules. Like, we live in LA and work in the entertainment industry. So we knew that we could not commit to a weekly show. And we batted around ideas for names for a really long time. And then I said, well, why don't we just call it what it is, Geek History Lesson? And that's what it is. And I was really into BBC's Sherlock, because that was before it became bad. And that was right after the second season had started. And it was when the idea of his mind palace was introduced, which obviously is not original to Sherlock. It's something that's been around for a really long time. So we were like, oh, well, what if it was a mind university? And then all the segments and the structure of the show is all built around sort of the tropes that come along with being a university student. And every time we add a segment, we have to come up with like some other clever way, so some other clever naming device or whatever. If people go all the way back to the beginning, it's pretty bad until episode maybe like 20 or 25. And then 50 was our Lois Lane episode. And I feel like after 50 is when we really figured the show out and got like a good shorthand with what we were doing in terms of our research. Because we do anywhere between 6 and, 18 hours on an episode, depending on how much research, how much reading we have to do. Like for Doom Patrol, for example, I taught that lesson. I had to do a lot of research. I had to basically reread almost the entire Grant Morrison run, or as much as I could cram into my brain, because I had not read it before. And that, my friends, takes quite some time.
I must confess, I kind of, in going through that Grant Morrison run, sometimes I'd read a page, and I'd just get to the end of it and I think, you know what? I don't know what's happening here. And I just have to read it again.
Yeah. Which is like, fine. This is fine. We'll just keep moving on.
But no, it's really, really good. Again, what I try and do, I talk a little bit about the comic background, but what I tend to do a light dusting, whereas you guys get right down in there, and it's amazing what you do. And I'm always impressed when I listen that you guys both have such an encyclopedic knowledge, and it's really, really impressive. So guys, if you're out there listening and you want to get more into the comics background, then get yourself over to Geek History Lesson.
Yeah, you can really tell how many friends we had in high school when you listen to that podcast.
Well, again, I mentioned my being called out for reading a bit of Asterix. I think things have changed quite a lot.
I think now, I don't think people understand how lucky they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't say it's swung right over to being cool, but it's a little bit more socially acceptable.
I mean, I remember vividly screaming after people about comic books down in my high school hallway. So,
well, the interesting thing I mentioned, reading the Claremont X-Men books back in the early 80s, and I read those same comics now, and I think, you know what? As a kid, I had no idea what was going on, did I? I thought I did, but clearly, there's a lot of subtext to all the stories, the social interactions. I think I was probably just looking at the pictures more, I think.
There's great art in that, though. And he brings in, Claremont is directly responsible for all of my favorite X people. Some of them were created by Len Wein, but they were, like Nightcrawler, for example, but they were highlighted the most in the Claremont era. So you were probably looking at the cool blue guy. Yeah,
that's right. Well, creator of Wolverine, of course, as well.
That's right. May he rest in power now that he has shoved off this mortal coil.
Yeah.
Shrugged off, not shoved off. Jesus, he was a really... Len Wein was such a nice man. I can't believe I just said that. I used to shop at... I used to work at Earth 2 Comics in Sherman Oaks, which is a shop in Los Angeles owned by Jeff Johns and has the JSA painting from Smallville hanging on the wall.
Nice.
And Len would come in, and he never made a big deal about it. He was never weird. If people, he gave creators a discount. If people didn't know who he was just like, hey, can I get that creator discount? He never bragged. He was always such a sweet, sweet man. So I can't believe I accused him of shoving something. That was so rude.
Well, I'm glad you clarified that he was.
Absolutely.
I did read those. I think CB Sobolski tweeted out the other day that there was a few guys. You walked into a comic shop and there were a few guys kind of just peer reviewing each other's portfolios. And he wandered across, and one of them looked good, and so he asked, can I have a look at it? And he was told, can he leave them alone? Obviously, not knowing who CB Sobolski was, and I just thought, if they go back to their home and read this, and realize it was them, what a massive missed opportunity there.
Well, it's also tough just because how many of us, unless you're going to conventions regularly, like how do you know what a comic book reader looks like? You know what I mean? We're not. It's easier now than it ever was before, but it's not like a movie star.
I guess I just thought of it as karma because it costs nothing to just be polite and have manners. So
this is America, my friend.
Well, there is that. So can we expect? Are there any plans at all for yourself or Jason to make it over to a UK con at all?
We would absolutely love to. The issue is them plane tickets is expensive. So the only way that we would go would be if we were brought as a guest. There's a lot of places in the UK we want to visit, so we're more likely to be over there. And I'm like, I want to go to the Scottish Highlands and like live my brave fantasy. We've never been to Liverpool, and we're huge Beatles fans, so you'll likely see us. I don't know if we'll be at a convention. The only convention that we have planned right now for the rest of the year is San Diego Comic-Con. And we're only going on Saturday. That's my favorite way to do a convention now, is to like get in and get out.
Yeah.
Like to go for a single day. Because they're very, very stressful. But I really want to go to Word Bubble is the big one, right?
I tend to go more to so there's Thought Bubble up in Leeds.
That's the one.
I tend to go to the London one. So you've got the London Super Comic Con. Mark Millar was running one called Kapow for a couple of years, but that seems to have disappeared. We were just recently at the MGM Comic Cons as well. So there's usually so Liverpool actually had one a few weeks ago. Didn't even know they were doing one, but seemed to pop up out of nowhere. So
damn, I got to get on emailing these places, asking them to bring us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll keep my eyes out. Obviously, getting the whole citizenship sorted first. That's the priority. But yeah, it'd be great to see you guys over here.
You'll be truly my first email. So
awesome. Well, Ashley, it's been fantastic. Really, honestly, as I said before, it's a massive honor to have you on the show, and it's been great for you to give up your time to talk to us.
Are you kidding? I'm so thankful that we were able to make it work with time zones and me being like, I surely can't do it that early.
You know what? We almost didn't have it as well, because I only realized today that we changed our clocks this Sunday just gone.
Oh, really? We did ours a couple weeks ago. Why are we still doing that?
I know. So I know from past experience that Europe and the US always change their clocks at different times. Luckily, my phone figures it all out, but for manual things that you schedule in. So when I looked last week, it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it was just today. I thought, oh wait, we changed the clocks. So we started at 6 o'clock today. But yeah, I was almost going to be on there at 5 o'clock, thinking, I don't think she's coming.
Angel must be so nice, and she's so rude.
No, it's been absolutely fantastic. So, Ashley, where can people find you on the internet?
Oh boy, you can find me all over the internet. I'm very findable at Ashley V. Robinson. The V is very important. I don't want to fight Ashley Robinson for SEO. She is a tall WNBA player. You can also find Geek History Lesson at geekhistorylesson.com. Our 250th episode drops on Tuesday evening, Pacific Standard Time. So go check that out. It's a super secret, and we haven't told anyone what we're talking about yet, but it is our #1 requested subject. And you can donate to Aurora and the Eagle at auroraandtheeagle.com. If you don't know how to spell those words, that's okay. No judgment. The links are all pinned to the top of my socials.
Awesome. And I'll include in the show notes here as well. And of course, we'll be retweeting and I'll be looking with interest to see if you can smash that stretch goal there.
Heck yeah.
Ashley, fantastic. Thank you very much. And I hope you have a lovely day.
You too.
So yeah, that was our interview with Ashley Victoria Robinson. And as you can hear, Chris got to try out a little bit of French there as well. So, not just having a great discussion with, again, someone who's got like an encyclopedic knowledge of comic books, but obviously has can speak French and also, has a bit of a love for Liverpool. I must admit, I was thinking after, I thought, you know what? I've missed a trick there, because I was thinking, you know what, I could have really, she's obviously said that, she wants to go to and visit Liverpool. I should have said, Chris would have missed that. He loves Liverpool. He's always going on about it, and just
my question would have been why. But anyway, I think it's all Dave as well. Listening to it, my French repertoire is swear words in French because I only got an E in GCSE French, and also Derek Trotter's Fabrique Belgique. So I don't think I would have been much cop there, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously I can't speak anymore either. So no, it was really good fun. But as we said, get yourself over there, back that Kickstarter. It is a really good read as well. And if you're interested in Jet Jupiter, which Ashley mentions as well, you can get onto that. I do know. So they've talked about they'll be releasing next week their episode 250 on the Geek History Lesson. And you're not going to want to miss that one. It's really, really, it's a great, great character that they pulled out the bag there.
Yeah, great stuff, Dave. Great. And thanks for taking up the interview. And obviously, we'll post all the links to Ashley's Kickstarter in the bio of the podcast, guys. So please get over there and give her a follow and support. And obviously, subscribe to her podcast as well, because it is a really, really good listen or watch, whichever way you look at it. I've actually been watching it on YouTube, Dave, and I've really enjoyed it. And also, next time, I will be on the show if we can get Ashley back on as well and see how the Kickstarter's gone and where she's got up to in a few months.
Yep. No, that sounds great. So if you want to get in touch with this show, you can get in contact with us at comicsinmotionpodcast@gmail.com or tweet us at comicsinmotionp. Now, Chris, how are you going to see us out of this show?
Well, Dave, you've just mentioned the French lesson you got, and I think there's only one thing I can say, Dave. Pomme de terre, tournée à droite. Goodbye.
Brilliant.